Welcome back to episode 6 of the PlamoTherapist podcast. If you're new here, my goal for this podcast is to show you guys how you can use model kits to benefit your mental health, or how you can use psychology to game your model kits to get more out of each and every build. If this sounds like something that you would be interested in, consider subscribing or following wherever you hear this podcast. Welcome, everybody. So, getting right into today's episode, we're going to be talking about the big question that I see a lot of times come up in a lot of different Gundam community or Gundam spheres when it comes to this hobby. And the big thing that I see a lot of the times is talking about that Gunpla addiction. Now, from my psychology standpoint and from where I sit here as the PlamoTherapist, my goal for this episode is to show you guys how Gunpla is actually not an addiction and why we need to move away from using that sort of language going here forward into the future. So if you're listening to this, I'm going to tell you guys why, but let's start with the role of a therapist and the role of a counselor, because I feel like that's going to be very important when we start to look into these things and how these things play out in the Gunpla addiction topic. So starting with the role of a counselor or a therapist, we do a lot of things when it comes to helping people with their mental health. This includes addressing their thoughts, feelings, emotions, relationships with other people that you may have. And so as a counselor, our job is to kind of help you figure out what you feel like would be the best route for you and give you the tools in order to be able to succeed in the things that you want for yourself. So what does that look like in terms of therapy? Well, sometimes we're just going to be the listening ear. We don't really need to fix everything in every moment of every session. For example, if you're going through a significant loss, there's no need for us to fix it. There's nothing we can do to fix the situation immediately right then and there. So a lot of the times what we'll do is we'll just sit and listen and we'll validate the feelings that you have. And so part of that validating of the feelings is how the counselor gains trust with their client. And so when we begin to gain their trust, we show them that our outlook, our experiences, and the things that we're doing is looking out for the benefits of the people that we're counseling. And sometimes that manifests itself in giving you guys the hard truths. What does that mean? Well, when you're talking to somebody who's trying to, let's say, quit smoking, we're not going to encourage them to continue to smoke their pack a day and believe that they're going to, quit smoking magically. No. Hard truth is that's not going to work. And sometimes it sucks to hear it, but it's what needs to be heard. And the role of the counselor, again, is to look out for the person's best interest from an objective point of view, meaning we're not tied into the universe. We're not a part of that world. We're on the outside looking in. And from our objective point of view, from our background, our history, the things that we have studied and the things that we've learned, we can give an objective opinion on the situation or an objective suggestion to help you guys through the situation in order to make the best decision that you can for yourself in order to move forward with where you want to be in life. So as a therapist, as a counselor, we're going to challenge you in these sorts of things. So in today's episode, there may be a little bit of some hard truth coming out, but again, I share these things because I care about you guys and I want you guys to develop healthy habits with this hobby. So going into that now, let's talk about what addiction is from a psychological standpoint. And the reality is addiction is not a psychological term. If you look up in the DSM-5 or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, it's the booklet that psychologists use in order to understand what are the common traits surrounding certain psychological conditions. For example, when it comes to depression, there are certain things that we look for, there are certain things that we see that are very common in people with depression. And so when we look at Gunpla and we look at the term addiction, addiction is actually broken up into two categories when it comes to substance use. And that's going to be the substance abuse category, and that's also going to be the substance dependence category. Starting with the substance abuse category, because this is the more clear one to define, this is usually when somebody takes a substance or does something in order to alter their state of consciousness. For example, some person will smoke any sort of hallucinogen in order to have a euphoric effect or to go on any sort of trip. They may ingest something that changes how they perceive reality. For example, they start to hallucinate colors or sounds. And so this is what is identified as substance abuse because you're using the substance to alter your physiological being. Now, Gunpla doesn't fit into that category because we're not ingesting it. And again, I don't recommend eating your Gunpla. It's definitely not going to be safe for you. But when we buy our kits, sometimes we feel different about ourselves, but that isn't in and of itself a physiological change. That is a reward response from our behaviors. So we're not ingesting anything to alter ourselves. We have purchased something that made us happy, or maybe we even feel guilty, or it changes how we feel, but not ultimately how we perceive or interact with the rest of this world. So with that being said, Gunpla doesn't fall under the substance abuse category when it comes to looking at psychological disorders. Now, when we look at the substance dependent side of things, this gets even harder for the Gunpla addiction to even hold up in the second place. So when we look at substance dependence, it's the idea that somebody has used a substance so much that they need to use it again in order to avoid the negative withdrawal. The most common way we can examine this is when we see people get caffeine headaches, where if they don't have their morning coffee, maybe they'll get a headache, they'll become irritable, they become restless, and they start to kind of fixate on trying to get, their morning cup of coffee before they do anything else. This is substance dependence because their ingestion of caffeine is going to help them avoid feeling those negative things. And so when we buy Gunpla, we're not avoiding negative withdrawal symptoms. Our body isn't going through any sort of rebounds. We don't get physically sick because we don't buy Gunpla. If you feel like that happens, maybe you should look inward more on why that might be, but that's not going to be a substance dependence case. That's going to be more an unhealthy interaction with your spending. And so this is where the hard truth comes in. And I need to preface everything I say from here on out with a little bit of a disclaimer. So yes, I talk about a lot of psychological issues, but anything I say in these podcast episodes and any of my videos should not be taken as professional advice or legal guidance. And if you feel like you qualify or you may need some psychological help, I highly recommend reaching out to a trained professional, either by phone or in person. And if you need help, reach out to medical professionals to see if they have recommendations for who you can go see. Now, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about why this sort of thing matters, why this language, and I use language very deliberately, matters when it comes to talking about our hobby. Well, it matters what we call it because the words that we use are going to be associated with the things that we do. And so it's important that we look at the things that we're doing. And if we're calling Gunpla an addiction, we're giving it such a negative label in and of ourselves that we start to take on some of those feelings associated with that label. For example, if you start to make a purchase that you probably shouldn't, maybe you already have a lot of kits, and you start to have that feelings of guilt, that's not because you have an addiction. That's because you deep down have issues regarding your purchase behavior. Maybe you have an impulse buy that you weren't planning to make, and that caused you to feel guilty about it. But instead of taking ownership of your purchasing power, you decide to blame an inanimate object for your poor decision, or for your lack of decision, for your lack of insight in order to make a decision. And so our language matters when it comes to these things, because ultimately, if we label it something else, one, what we're doing is we're taking the blame off of ourselves and we're putting it on an inanimate object. Two, we're avoiding giving ourselves the opportunity to reflect and look inwards on our relationship with the hobby, having a deeper discussion about why we feel the way we feel when we make a purchase, and ultimately changes how we interact with our hobby. And three, the language we use doesn't just affect us, but it affects the people around us. And I'm not just talking about within the hobby, but when we talk about our hobby to people outside of the hobby. For example, if I were to call Gunpla an addiction, that gives such a negative connotation to it that the person I'm saying it to is going to think, oh, that's kind of a very negative label. So my subconscious interaction, my subconscious understanding of Gunpla is that that's a negative thing. And so when they see us make another purchase, that reminder that this was a negative thing brings back into their head, and now they're seeing your next purchase as a negative thing. And so when they tell you, do you think you have enough? Maybe you shouldn't buy this kit. Maybe you should build more before you buy more. They're thinking that in telling you these things, they're trying to help you because you have given them the idea that this is something that's unhealthy. You have given them the idea that this is something negative, and now they're trying to help you because you brought this on yourself by saying that this was something negative. So you can't have your cake and say that, oh, this is an addiction, but I need you to be understanding that this is something that makes me happy. You can't say that this is an addiction and that it makes you happy at the same time. It doesn't work that way. We can't do that because it causes such a problem within our own community, because now people don't understand that this is something that we enjoy, but we're calling it something negative. How are we even going to take that seriously? So it's important that we use the correct words when we're talking about something that we enjoy. So when we use those sorts of language, we need to be clear about what we're talking about, which takes me into my next thing, the reason we call it an addiction. Again, I kind of touched on it a little bit, saying that, we skirt the responsibility of our own purchasing power, but deep down, even more so, by calling it an addiction, we put up a wall between us and the actual conversation. When we call it an addiction, it avoids people outside of us, outside of the community, from interacting with it in a more deeper level, meaning they hear it's an addiction and their immediate thing is that it's kind of a personal topic that maybe they shouldn't pursue further. But what you're doing is you're hindering yourself from having an honest introspection about your relationship to the hobby. And this matters because if you continue to avoid these conversations, what you're doing is you're not allowing yourself to examine the relationship you have with this hobby. You let these negative words build up, you let these negative labels build up, then you feel guilty about the purchases that you make. When well aware you're probably fully able to afford these things, you have the space for another kit. It doesn't matter how many kits you buy. If you're happy and you are not doing anything that's going to hurt another person, or you're buying another kit because you can afford it and it makes you happy, there's no reason to feel guilty about it. So we need to stop using these labels and start building those positive interactions around our hobby. So how do we begin to do those sorts of things? Well, first it starts with our labels. We have to remember that this hobby, and I continue to say the word hobby, is something that makes us happy. We need to associate the things that we love with these positive labels. Gunpla makes me happy. Building model kits brings me joy. I am proud of the things that I create because it is something that was intrinsic to me. When we begin to use these positive labels and shift away from our negative labels, we can start to feel positive about the things that we interact with. And then when it comes to the moment where we have that purchase that we feel guilty about, we can have that honest conversation with ourselves. Hey, this is something that I am happy about, but why do I feel guilty? Why am I not happy about this purchase? And you can think about it. Is it because deep down you didn't have the money for it right now and your paycheck comes, next week and not this week? That's relatable. It's understandable. Maybe you already have a few kits that you really need to get around to building before you can purchase this thing. Understandable, relatable. I have kits that I've bought recently, Witcher Mercury kits. They're amazing kits, but they're piling up on top of my old kits that I still haven't built yet. It's understandable, it's relatable, but it happens. So when we start to have these honest conversations, we can understand why our feelings are negative around the purchase. Then we know that next time when it comes up, we can be more aware of those purchases. And we can tell ourselves, you know what? I don't need this kit right now. This is a fairly common kit, or it's a brand new kit that I know they're going to get more prints of. I can hold off on buying more. And then when I get around to finishing some kits, maybe then I can buy that kit that I really wanted. And ultimately what's going to happen is we shift that negative impulse buys away from our mindset. And we start to put in this mindset of, when I make a purchase, it is a positive interaction because I know deep down that this purchase isn't going to hurt me. This purchase is going to make me happy. I have earned it. I have finished my backlog, or I am all caught up, or yes, I have the space for it now. And now you can make this purchase and you can be now proud of your purchases. And when you use those positive labels, other people will be happy for your purchases too. Instead of saying, oh, yeah, I did get another kit. You'd be like, yeah, I got another kit. Come take a look here. Yeah, I have a few more, but I got this new one because I'm really excited to build this one. Or this one just got released, so I'm excited to put this at the front of the line. Whatever it may be, you can begin to associate positive feelings with your purchases again. So not only are you building kits, not only does that make you happy, but now you also get the added benefit of being happy with your purchases again. And again, all of these things are adding up to making the entire Gunpla or model kit experience a positive one for you to interact with. So in closing, don't use Gunpla as an addiction. Don't use that as an excuse as to why you made a purchase. That's not a good enough excuse. You're better than that. Be honest with yourself. Hey, this was an impulse buy. I can do better next time. Or, you know what? I need to stop using these labels because, other people are using it too. We're creating a culture of people that say they have a Gunpla addiction when that's not the case. They just feel guilty about their purchases and they're not technically suffering from any issues. They just made a bad decision. It happens, but it's okay. We do not need to berate ourselves. We do not need to belittle ourselves just because we made a bad choice. So be positive about your hobby. Be happy with it. Be mindful of your purchases. Be aware of your purchases. And then ultimately, when you're ready to make that purchase, you can be happy again, knowing that this purchase is acceptable and that the choices that you made are okay. With that said, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you found some value in this episode. And remember, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Go do what you love.